Now, the challenge with this is who gets to decide what is conspiratorial, what is legitimate difference of opinion, and what is an appropriate theory of power to talk about. When should disagreements be bridged, and when should people be exposed to a different perspective? Now, if it's not obvious from my comments, I have a very specific scientific way of thinking. I believe in climate science. I believe in vaccination. I believe in the Holocaust. And I don't actually have acceptance for the things that are in those conspiratorial logics. And in my head, the idea that there are sides about this debate is a false equivalency that is produced in an irresponsible and dangerous way. Right? That's my value system. But the lines aren't always so clear. I gave you things that I think are relatively clear. But as a researcher, I realize that people hold contradictory and different opinions. I respect that one person's religion is another person's myth. I recognize that political comments are actually nuanced. And when it comes to knowledge, I accept that people hold different epistemologies. In other words, how people build a sense of knowledge varies tremendously. I might be wedded to scientific and rational approaches, but some people actually start with experience or faith, and I respect that. Now, since our friend Eli Pariser, who's in the room, first coined the term, many people have lamented the presence of filter bubbles on social media. In the political context, they're seen as dangerous, especially on sites like Facebook. And it means that people end up in this environment. So we talk about what it means to be exposed to the other side, right? But researchers struggle with this because often people self-segregate, regardless of what the algorithms recommend. They push and they double down on a world that's just like them. And so when is it appropriate for a recommendation engine to provide new information? Is that actually helping inform people, or is that proselytizing? Is that in itself an act of power that needs to be contested? And what happens when the starting point is in two radically different places? My colleague Francesca Tripodi wrote a beautiful book, paper called Searching for Alternative Facts, which is actually available outside, that describes the moment when she was sitting in a Bible study in Virginia. Now, after spending an hour sort of interpreting a particular biblical passage, the pastor brought up the tax reform bill. This wasn't something that she was expecting. But diving into a particular passage in the tax reform bill, the pastor encouraged the congregants to apply the same kind of scriptural sense-making that they applied to the Bible, that they should apply to the political text. And through a process of working through what that text said, they came to an interpretation that is fundamentally different from what you would hear from political wonks in DC. That's interesting, right? Why does it mean that the same text can be used to make different meaning? Now, she goes on to talk about how this same practice of scriptural inference is applied to Google searches. Instead of using the search engine to research a topic, many of the evangelical communities that she talked about going to Google in order to get affirmation of something. And she tried to understand what that was about. And she realized that she was listening to talk radio and to a bunch of the different kinds of media that this community was consuming, that they were being told how to search. And that the process and project of going to a search engine is to figure out the right search query before you even begin. That if you're looking for the wrong search query, you get the wrong information. You have to look for the right query. And the question then is, who produces the right query? Right? We're back to the manipulation plot. Because where people start from sends people down fundamentally different information paths. So what does that mean in practice? Consider the difference in YouTube for searching for Vatican pedophiles versus Vatican sexual abuse. My guess is that for those of you in the news business, you used one of these terms and not the other. Now, YouTube, in this context, collapsed the notion of gay and homosexuality, so that if you search for Vatican gay or Vatican homosexuality, you get to the same content. It's a lot more tricky to start to collapse the idea of sexual abuse and pedophiles, or to collapse homosexuality with pedophiles. Right there, we've got a problem. Now, where you start doing that on the back end, actually, no matter what, shapes what people do, because the result is that these terms send you down entirely different paths. Your information landscape, your recommendation engines, everything shapes based on even how you begin this process. She was also talking to a bunch of voters during a primary election. She wanted to figure out how candidates would figure out who they vote for. Now, she was in Virginia, and everybody around her told her that they didn't trust fake news, by which they meant CNN. So she knew that they were going to find a different path that was not about news, per se. They were going to try to find a different way of making sense. So she was expecting to hear about community and all of these ways of trying to sense things. And so they were like, no, we go to Google. She was like, oh, okay, I know how to go to Google to search, right? And as an academic, she was like, great. And she was sitting down trying to make sense of it. It's like, why is this so problematic? And then she realized something important. They didn't search to go look at content. They didn't click on the content. They put side by side all of the different candidates within a primary to see what Google would offer up, because Google provided all sides, and they felt as though this would provide perspective. In other words, those headlines that are written, the little clips, they mattered more than anything. Same ends up being true on YouTube. So much of it is not about watching the video, but watching what are the little quips, or what are the kinds of comments that surface up, the things that surround it, the text that is meant to get you to click on it. Only it doesn't get you to click on it. It ends up being the end of the story, not the beginning of it. Now, this was not how Google was designed. In fact, when we talked to Google engineers about the fact that people were doing, they flipped out, right? Because Google is explicitly not designed to be liberal or conservative, no matter how many times you're told otherwise. But it is designed to be data-driven. It does have an epistemology that assumes that the knowledge is within the data. And it does assume that people will click through and not simply read the headlines. Now, this is a fallacy that we struggle with in general, right? Those in the field of journalism know that there's a constant struggle about what those headlines do. Are those headlines trying to get your people in to read, or do they do the work on their own? It's not just that people don't read the headlines on Google. They often perceive the world through the notifications, through the little bits that they see, through what people post around the content on Twitter or Facebook. And that's where it's a struggle, because you're not just controlling misinformation with the actual content that we spend so much time focusing on. You're dealing with it with the surround information. And that's what we know exploiters know how to exploit.